What would you do if the most prestigious car company on earth offered to create something for you, a vehicle so rare, so advanced, so tailored that no king, no president, no billionaire could claim anything like it? A one-of-a-kind machine, made not just to drive, but to dazzle. To announce your arrival among the global elite. For many, the answer would be easy. They'd accept. They'd smile for the cameras. They'd step into the leather-bound seat of history and speed ahead, into the pantheon of the world's powerful. But what if the answer was no? This is the story of that no. When BMW, the crown jewel of German engineering, reached out to Burkina Faso's president Ibrahim Traoré, the world expected a celebratory partnership. This wasn't just a car. It was an event, an emblem, a crowning moment. And for a continent long written out of the narratives of luxury, it was also something else, a chance to reclaim a seat at the table of global prestige. The offer came not as a press release, but in the form of a letter sealed in gold foil. Sent directly from BMW's CEO, the message was as bold as the brand itself. It proposed a limited edition hyper-luxury vehicle personally crafted for Traoré himself. Every stitch, every curve, every feature would reflect his vision. The world's finest materials, the most advanced technology, solar integration, diamond inlays, a statement of status, leadership, and innovation, all in one. To BMW, this was more than a gesture. It was strategy, a signal. The era of African influence had arrived, and what better way to honor that than by placing the continent's most talked-about young leader behind the wheel of a masterpiece? A vehicle not just of movement, but of meaning. And soon, the world took notice. Media outlets across Europe, Asia, and North America lit up with speculation. Headlines flashed with excitement. BMW offers exclusive car to Africa's rising star. Burkina Faso's humble leader enters elite auto legacy. A gift fit for royalty, designed for a revolutionary. From Berlin to New York, the narrative was already writing itself. Would Traoré embrace the moment? Would he break from his humble, no-frills image to accept the throne of steel and chrome? Would the boy who walked barefoot through the red dust of West Africa now drive the most coveted machine on earth? Talk shows buzzed, podcasts debated. Some analysts called it the perfect bridge between Africa's new leadership and the global elite. Others wondered if it was a trap. In Paris and London, political commentators speculated about the diplomatic implications. In Dakar and Accra, everyday citizens weighed pride against skepticism. Was this a reward for resistance, or a seduction dressed as recognition? But nowhere was the question more loaded than at home. In Burkina Faso's cities and villages, the air was thick with conflicting feelings. People didn't have access to fancy blogs or polished newsrooms. They didn't rush to Twitter to debate. But in open markets, in schoolyards, in packed taxis, the whisper was the same. Would our president forget the dust? The hunger, the struggle. Would he now wear the uniform of the elite? Or would he remember who he was and who we are? Back in the glossy boardrooms of Europe, the anticipation only grew. BMW executives envisioned a grand reveal at a major auto show in Berlin, Paris, or Dubai, a spectacle of sound, light, and symbolism. They imagined President Traoré shaking hands with high-level CEOs, cameras flashing, leather seats glowing under showroom lights. They imagined applause, headlines, influence. It was all lined up. But what they didn't count on, what they never fully understood, was the man behind the offer. Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier-turned-statesman, the revolutionary who rose from the village dust not to chase gold-plated dreams, but to defend dignity. Traoré had read the proposal. He had seen the designs. He had heard the promises and predictions. And while the world projected its dreams and assumptions onto him, behind closed doors, he was quiet, still, reflective. Because the truth was, Deep down, he already knew this story wouldn't end the way the world expected. No parades, no luxury launch, no new crown of steel. And as the world leaned in, breath held, ready to celebrate Africa's great ascension into the kingdom of elite consumption, Traoré was preparing to do something few in his position ever dared. Something that would not just send shockwaves across the luxury car industry, but force the world to rethink what power really looks like. This wasn't a rejection of luxury for the sake of humility. This was about something deeper. It was about message, meaning, memory. Because when you've grown up walking 5 miles barefoot to school, when you've watched your mother carry water under a burning sun, when your first classroom had no windows and your meals came once a day, then a diamond-inlaid dashboard doesn't sparkle the same way. It blinds. And if you're not careful, it blinds not just you, but everyone watching. So Traoré stayed silent. Let the media buzz, let the world guess. Because in the quiet, in the solitude of thought, he understood. The car was never the offer. The car was the test. And the answer, he decided, wouldn't be announced with engine roars or velvet curtains. It would be delivered with conviction, quiet, sharp, final. Inside the sun-drenched halls of Burkina Faso's presidential palace, excitement was building like pressure in a sealed drum. The kind of pressure that makes powerful men lean forward in their chairs and dream of glory. Jean-Louis, the president's trusted media advisor, practically floated down the corridor, clutching the BMW proposal like a sacred scroll. His voice quivered with anticipation as he entered the council chamber, where President Traoré sat silently at the head of a long mahogany table. "Mr. President," Jean-Louis began, barely containing his breathless awe, "this isn't just about a car. It's a symbol, a global statement that Burkina Faso is no longer in the shadows." Around the table, the president's inner circle nodded enthusiastically. Their faces were filled with a kind of eager reverence, as if this car had the power to lift the nation into a new stratosphere. Some whispered about diplomatic opportunities. Others speculated about how this single gesture might smooth pathways to investment in Paris or Washington. For many, this wasn't just an automobile. It was an ambassador on 4 wheels. The BMW package was meticulously prepared. Page after glossy page showcased the company's vision. A sleek design tailored to Traoré's image, interiors hand-stitched from rare leather, sustainable tech powered by solar cells, and perhaps most provocatively, a dashboard embedded with ethically sourced diamonds. "It's more than luxury," Jean-Louis urged, flipping another page, his voice gaining speed. "It's diplomacy. It's the future. Imagine arriving at the next African Union summit in this masterpiece. You'd turn every head. You'd shift every narrative." Traoré leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. His fingers rested gently on the leather-bound proposal, as if weighing not its content, but its consequence. He listened, not just to the words spoken, but to the tone, the hunger, the unspoken ambitions swirling through the room. Around him, men he had once trusted to speak truth now spoke in calculated pitches, each voice tinted with visions of global praise, flashing cameras, and velvet-lined hotel lobbies. He felt the room's temperature rise, not from heat, but from excitement, the kind of excitement that blinds even the most loyal. Then came the softest, most dangerous part of the offer. BMW's CEO hadn't just proposed to deliver a finished product. He'd invited the president to be part of the process, co-designing the vehicle, shaping its identity. This wasn't a gift, they said. It was collaboration, a partnership between power and prestige. They promised a global reveal, streamed across continents, celebrated by celebrities, analyzed by economists. "The message is clear," Jean-Louis whispered, moving closer. "Burkina Faso has arrived." The president said nothing. His silence stretched so long it became a kind of presence in the room. Thick, deliberate, unshakable. Jean-Louis, sensing hesitation, tried one last angle. "Sir," he said quietly, "you can't lead the poor forever. The world respects what it can see." That was the moment something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Traoré turned to him. His voice, when it came, was soft but iron-heavy. "What do you see, Jean-Louis?" The advisor blinked, unsure. "Sir?" "When you look at this car, what do you see?" the president asked again, his eyes locked onto Jean-Louis's with quiet intensity. The answer came after a beat too long. "Power, prestige, influence." Traoré nodded very slowly. "That's the problem," he murmured. In that instant, his mind drifted, not to politics or headlines or glowing dashboards, but to a boy he once was. A boy walking barefoot across hot earth, his skin blistered by the sun, his school books held together with twine. He thought of the women in rural villages who carried water in plastic containers balanced on their heads. He thought of his mother's hands, rough with labor, trembling as she stirred a pot of porridge that barely fed the family. He remembered making promises to himself, promises whispered into the night sky, alone, unknown. Promises that no matter how far he rose, he would never lose sight of the ground beneath his feet. Now, here it was. The temptation. The car was stunning. It was brilliance shaped in steel. It glowed with the allure of being seen, of being acknowledged. But beneath the shine, Traoré saw something else. A trade, a transaction. If he accepted, the message would be unmistakable. My comfort matters more than yours. My image outweighs your needs. And the truly terrifying part was that even the men in that room, his own team, couldn't see it. He stood. The chatter stopped. The room fell into a hush. The weight of a nation's crossroads settled in the silence. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow," he said, his voice steady, unmoved by the energy that had pulsed minutes earlier. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't explain, because deep in his heart, the answer was already clear. It wouldn't be about the car. It would be about the people, about what leadership truly means when no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when the cameras are gone and the decisions live on in the lives of the forgotten. And with that, he left the room. The morning sun had barely risen over the capital, but already the city was humming with a kind of electric anticipation. Something historic was about to happen. You could feel it in the crowded press room of Burkina Faso's government palace, where international reporters jostled for position beneath flickering lights and staticky microphones. Cameramen whispered into earpieces, adjusting lenses, ensuring their shot was perfect. Outside, security teams moved with brisk efficiency. The air was tight with expectation. Everyone believed they knew what was coming. After all, moments like this don't happen by accident. This wasn't just a press conference. It was supposed to be a coronation. From Paris to New York, Berlin to Beijing, the world had turned its eyes toward this landlocked West African nation. The global press had gathered like bees to honey, certain they were about to witness a spectacle, a young African president accepting a once-in-a-lifetime gift from one of the most iconic car companies on the planet. Some journalists had even pre-written their headlines. BMW's masterpiece, Africa's leader joins the elite. A new image for the continent. The subtext was clear. This was Africa's long-awaited moment of arrival. The old image of dust and struggle would be replaced with carbon fiber and polished chrome. And President Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier-turned-leader, was the face of that change. The hall fell silent as he entered. There was no parade of bodyguards, no designer suit, no carefully choreographed walk. Just Traoré, calm, steady, dressed in the same simple tunic he'd worn for years. No one could read his expression. He stepped up to the podium slowly, his Hands steady, his gaze deliberate. For a few seconds, he simply stood there, letting the silence thicken. Then he adjusted the microphone and began to speak. "I want to thank the team at BMW," he said, his tone unexpectedly warm. "Their offer was generous, their vision truly impressive." You could feel the room exhale. Smiles began to form. Pens hovered over notepads. This was it. The moment he would accept. The moment a new narrative would be born. Cameras clicked. Lights blinked. But then his tone shifted. "This is not about cars or design or even technology," he continued, pausing just long enough to make the room lean in. "It is about the message we send." Murmurs rippled across the hall. The energy shifted. The reporters stopped smiling. "My people," he said, his voice gaining weight, "walk miles every day for water. They stand in line for hours at hospitals that do not have enough medicine. Their children study in schools with no electricity, no running water, sometimes no roof." He paused, and then laid his hand flat on the podium like anchoring his words to the earth itself. How can I, as their leader, drive a car worth more than an entire rural school district?" A stunned silence gripped the room. You could hear the click of a pen drop to the floor. Eyes widened. Flashbulbs popped again, but this time with hesitation. This was not the speech they expected. This was not the pageantry they came for. It was something else. Something they had no script for. "I cannot accept this gift," he said flatly. Gasps echoed across the room. One reporter let out a soft, "What?" under his breath. Another reached instinctively for her phone. It wasn't just that he said no. It was how easily he said it, how firmly. "I cannot," he repeated. "And I will not." His voice was stronger now, more grounded. Because leadership is not about comfort. It is not about symbols meant to impress those who will never walk our roads, who will never feel our hunger, who will never carry our burdens. Leadership, he said, is about sacrifice. It is about choosing people over praise. It is about standing in rooms like this, before men and women with power and microphones and saying, "I will not forget who I serve." The room remained frozen, the silence pierced only by camera shutters and the quiet hum of a global audience suddenly unsure of what they were witnessing. "I want the world," Traoré continued, "to see Africa not through the lens of luxury, but through the dignity of its people." And then, just like that, he stepped back from the microphone. No grand bow, no applause cue, no photo opportunity with a mock-up vehicle beside him. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't wait to be filled, because it already said everything it needed to. As Traoré exited, the room erupted, not into celebration, but into chaos. Reporters scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Some yelled out questions, others dictated rapid summaries into handheld recorders. Across the world, the story hit social media like a wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags like "He said no," "Traoré rejects BMW," and "People over prestige" began trending globally. Newsrooms back in Europe and America raced to adjust their headlines. The AO narrative had flipped in real time, and it was more powerful than anyone had anticipated. Traoré refuses BMW in unprecedented act of leadership. Africa's young president turns down luxury to stand with his people. "I cannot drive while my people walk." And while the world scrambled to catch up, Ibrahim Traoré had already left the building. He wasn't interested in how the story would be spun. He didn't wait for applause or explanation. His message had been delivered. Not just to the media, not just to Europe or America, but to the young boy walking to school without shoes, to the woman boiling water over an open fire, to the farmer counting every grain of millet. They were his audience. They always had been. Because in the end, Traoré understood something few leaders truly do. Real power doesn't come from what you sit inside. It comes from who you stand beside. By the time the sun had begun to dip behind the horizon in Ouagadougou, the shockwaves had already circled the globe. What was supposed to be a luxury press announcement had instead become one of the most unexpected political statements in modern memory. Across every major news outlet, the headlines were not about a new car, but about the man who said no to it. Traoré's rejection of the BMW gift wasn't simply reported. It was dissected, debated, deconstructed. From CNN to Al Jazeera, pundits searched for meaning. Was it idealism or strategy? Was this the beginning of a new African narrative or just a fleeting headline? Social media, however, didn't wait for analysis. It roared. TikTok videos exploded across feeds, many featuring young Africans using their own voices to repeat his words, "I cannot and I will not accept." Hashtags like "Windy, lead with dignity," "You can't eat leather seats," and "Traoré said no" dominated platforms. Memes emerged within hours. One showed a diamond-studded dashboard fading into the image of a rural school without desks. Another, more solemn, featured Traoré's face alongside the quote, "Leadership is not about comfort, it's about sacrifice." In Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya, and South Africa, artists painted murals on city walls. One mural depicted Traoré walking through a dust-swept village, barefoot but upright, while luxury cars trailed behind him, forgotten. In the background, children held signs reading, "We are enough," in cafes and classrooms, in church gatherings, and radio debates. The conversation was no longer about cars. It was about character. It was about the meaning of power in a world where image often matters more than substance. And for a generation that had grown up watching leaders disappear into gated compounds and black-tinted convoys, Traoré had shattered the glass. He had shown up without the script, and somehow he had made people believe again. Meanwhile, in the West, reactions were as divided as the world itself. Some commentators, especially in progressive circles, praised the move as a masterclass in ethical leadership, comparing Traoré to historical icons like Mandela or Gandhi. Major newspapers published think pieces with titles like "What? Western Leaders Can Learn from Traoré" and "The Car He Refused, a Symbol for a New Era." One viral tweet from an American activist simply read, "He turned down the car, he turned up the standard." But not everyone celebrated. Critics in luxury media circles called the move naive. Business magazines accused him of performative humility, claiming that rejecting a gift from a corporate titan like BMW could set back potential partnerships. One particularly biting editorial from a major European outlet mocked the decision as self-righteous theater, warning that Africa won't develop on pride alone. A popular economic podcast asked, "Is symbolism enough to feed a nation?" And yet, despite the backlash, something had undeniably shifted. BMW, caught completely off guard, launched into damage control. Their carefully curated campaign, once meant to spotlight their progressive branding, had imploded. Their social media feeds, filled with photos of luxurious car interiors and global partnerships, were suddenly flooded with biting comments. "Luxury for who? You tried to buy a legacy. Traoré built one without you." The company's press team remained silent for nearly 72 hours before releasing a bland, cautious statement. But the moment had already passed. The story had taken on a life of its own. And back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré stayed silent. He didn't gloat. He didn't correct the misinterpretations. He didn't seek to clarify. His message, delivered with quiet resolve, was already echoing louder than any press release ever could. In response to the attention, something even more powerful began to unfold. Not from Traoré himself, but from the people he had inspired. Students in Ghana launched a campus campaign titled "Dignity Before Diamonds." In Côte d'Ivoire, a youth organization started a movement challenging African leaders to adopt visible humility as part of national service. In Ethiopia, an entire episode of a major talk show was dedicated to exploring how leaders should balance representation with responsibility, and neighboring heads of state, often criticized for their excesses, were caught in an uncomfortable spotlight. Some publicly praised Traoré's decision, hoping the reflected glow would soften scrutiny. Others said nothing at all, letting the silence speak volumes. But what became clear was that the game had changed. Traoré had drawn a new line in the sand, and across Africa the people had taken notice, especially the youth. To them, this wasn't about a car. It was about the story they'd grown up with. That to be powerful meant to be removed, to be above, to be unreachable. Traoré had flipped the script. Without slogans, without speeches, he had told them they were worthy, that their pain mattered, that a leader's first duty is not to look rich, but to stay real. And for a generation weary of corruption and disillusioned, with polished speeches, that truth hit deeper than any luxury vehicle ever could. But perhaps the most unexpected turn came not from critics or followers, but from BMW itself. Sources close to the company revealed that, behind the scenes, the board was shaken by the global backlash. And in a surprising reversal, the same executives who had once seen Traoré as a marketing opportunity quietly reached out again. This time, not to offer him another car, but to explore a new initiative, one focused on sustainable transport development in Africa. They proposed to invest, not as donors, not as saviors, but as partners, not with cameras, but with engineers, not with gold-trimmed dashboards, but with rubber that could survive unpaved roads. Traoré's office issued no public comment, but insiders said one thing was clear. If there was to be collaboration, it would be on his terms, with no names on plaques, no velvet rope events, no exploitation masked as empowerment. Because Traoré understood the power of a single word, no. A no that created space for something far greater than a car. A no that turned into a lesson, a movement, a mirror. He had refused the car, but in doing so, he had given his people something far more valuable. Hope. Months passed, but the impact of Ibrahim Traoré's decision never faded. It wasn't just a viral moment or a news cycle anomaly. His refusal to accept the custom-built BMW didn't drift into obscurity. It crystallized into something far greater than even he could have planned. Across Burkina Faso and far beyond, the echoes of that single decision began to take shape in ways no one had anticipated. What began as a bold personal stand had blossomed into a national movement and then into an international conversation. Not about cars, not even about power, but about purpose. In villages across the country, people weren't just talking, they were organizing. Young entrepreneurs who had once dreamed of importing luxury goods began shifting their focus. They no longer saw validation in wearing foreign suits or driving foreign cars. Instead, they talked about innovation rooted in identity. They invoked Traoré's name not as a politician, but as a symbol of what it meant to lead with your feet on the ground. In public forums and community centers, the phrase "leadership through closeness" became a mantra. The people didn't want distance anymore. They wanted connection. And Traoré? He listened. Inspired by the momentum and the overwhelming public support, his government announced an initiative that took everyone by surprise, the People's Mobility Project. Rather than funneling resources into expensive foreign imports, Burkina Faso would develop its own affordable electric vehicle, built for local roads, designed with rural communities in mind, powered by the sun, and engineered by local talent. It wouldn't be wrapped in chrome or covered in luxury badges. It wouldn't be a car you posed with. It would be a car you lived with. A car born of necessity, not vanity. The initiative, quietly dubbed Burkina 1, attracted not just domestic support but international attention. Foreign universities, development organizations, and even automotive engineers from other African nations reached out to collaborate, not to dictate, but to contribute. With support from across the continent, a team of Burkinabe engineers, many of them still in their 20s, began sketching out designs. The goal was clear: to build something durable, accessible, and uniquely African. Within 2 years, the first Burkina 1 models rolled off the assembly line. They weren't flashy. They didn't have diamond dashboards, but they ran. They were efficient. They were solar-assisted. And most importantly, they belonged, not to a president, not to a boardroom, but to the people. And when the first vehicle was ready to be delivered, Traoré made a decision that once again turned convention on its head. He didn't take the first one. He didn't pose for pictures. Instead, he asked that the first Burkina 1 go to a woman, a teacher, who had walked for decades across dirt roads to reach her rural school. When she received the keys, she wept. Not just because of the car, but because someone, somewhere, had remembered her journey, her story, her quiet sacrifices. That photograph, her holding the keys, tears in her eyes, became the front-page image of newspapers from Nairobi to New York. It wasn't orchestrated, it wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And it resonated in a way luxury never could. Traoré wasn't done. In a move that stunned even his closest allies, he revealed that the original BMW design sketches, the ones mailed to him with gold-trimmed pages and elite confidentiality, had been preserved, and he was putting them up for auction. Not to profit, not for prestige, but to raise funds for rural education. The auction took place in Geneva, and to the shock of many, the sketches sold for millions. Every cent, every single coin, was redirected to fund classrooms in the very regions where his people still walked miles for a desk and a textbook. That act, more than any speech or ceremony, became the punctuation mark on his legacy in the making. It wasn't about what he rejected. It was about what he built in its place. Across the world, his decisions began to inspire broader reflection. In America and Europe, leadership forums and business schools held panels titled "The Power of Saying No" and "Minimalist Leadership in a Maximalist World." Thought leaders debated whether the traditional symbols of status, private jets, gold watches, luxury cars, still held the same power in a world increasingly aware of inequality. Could leaders command loyalty through simplicity? Could integrity ever truly outweigh image? The answer, slowly, was starting to shift. Even BMW, once embarrassed by the very public rejection, began to reassess. Executives initiated internal conversations. A new division, focused on sustainable, socially responsible transportation, was quietly formed. And in a remarkable twist of history, the same company that had once tried to seduce a leader with luxury now sought to collaborate with African governments on clean mobility projects. They weren't leading the narrative anymore. They were following Traoré's. Back home, in the streets of Ouagadougou, something else happened. Murals began to appear. One, stretched across a wall near a busy intersection, showed Traoré barefoot, in a dusty village, walking alongside a group of children with backpacks. Behind them, fading into the horizon, was the shadow of a gleaming car left untouched. Beneath the painting were 6 words, now etched into the national psyche. A leader who refused the throne of steel. And then there were the stories. Oral. Traditions began picking it up. Griots and poets crafted spoken-word performances titled "The Car He Walked Away From." School children learned about the moment in their civic textbooks, but it wasn't just about the BMW anymore. It was about dignity. It was about reminding future generations that power, when worn with humility, transforms from domination into legacy. And what about Traoré himself? He remained unchanged. still walking unannounced into clinics, still sitting under trees with farmers, still refusing the blacked-out SUVs and the diamond-studded chairs. Because he understood that leadership is not about being seen in power, it's about being seen with your people. That's the kind of power that doesn't need an engine to move mountains. In a world driven by excess, he chose restraint. In a time addicted to visibility, he embraced presence. And in a system where leaders often rise by climbing over the backs of their people, he stood among them and lifted them. So now the question turns to us. What would you do? Would you take the car? Would you accept the symbol? Would you chase the glow? Or would you walk step by step with your people? Because sometimes the most powerful vehicle isn't the one you drive, it's the one you build together. What Ibrahim Traoré did wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. In a world where leaders often chase spotlight, applause, and luxury, he chose silence, service, and substance. He turned down comfort to uphold the soul of a nation. And in doing so, he reminded us all that leadership isn't about being admired from afar. It's about walking beside the people who believe in you, even when no one else is watching. If this story made your heart beat a little faster, if it made you feel proud or angry or simply hopeful for what leadership could be, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done? Would you take the car or walk with your people? Subscribe for more real stories of power, purpose, and people, because sometimes the quietest acts echo the loudest across history.